Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Embrace the Echo Grief Talks. I am Stephanie, and here with me is my co host, Shay. Today, we will explore into the heart of a profound and often intricate journey, the connection between trauma and grief.
Here in this podcast, we've always believed in the power of conversation to illuminate the human experience. Today's episode is particularly close to our hearts as we unpack the significance of understanding the interwoven threads of trauma and grief.
It's a journey that touches the depths of our souls and has the potential to bring profound insights to anyone traversing the complexities of healing. In recognizing the interconnectedness of trauma and grief, we pave the way for a more holistic and empathic approach to our shared human experience.
So, why is this exploration so crucial, you might ask? Well, understanding the ties that bind trauma and grief is like holding a lantern in the darkness of emotional turmoil.
Trauma often leaves an indelible mark, shaking the very foundations of our being. And when grief enters the equation, it becomes a profound companion of this challenging time. By unraveling the connection between the two, we empower ourselves, our listeners, and viewers to navigate the complexities of healing with grace and understanding.
So, today we are honored to have a guide on this exploration from a compassionate coach that can help us bring light to the intricate journey of trauma and grief. So, please join us with our special guest today. He is the founder and chairman of the UDrive Group Philippines, the owner of Poy De Lara Coach and Consultant Canada, certified trauma and addictions recovery coach and consultant, certified in religious trauma studies. He's a member of the International Coaching Federation, and lastly, a member of the American Academy of Experts in Traumatic Stress. So please welcome our very own Coach Poy De Lara.
Thank you for having me. It's an honor, Shay and Stephanie, to be here at your show, Embrace the Echo Grief Talks. And again, I appreciate your efforts of leading the support group for grief, which is one of the newest support groups in the Step Forward network of support systems dito sa UDrive. Now, exploring the interconnectedness of trauma and grief is not just about understanding. It is a crucial, important step to healing, di ba? So together, we expect that the three of us in this conversation, will navigate the landscape of pain and resilience. We're gonna shed light to the transformative power of acknowledging and integrating these profound experiences. The most important part of these experiences is the part that we have, or we as human beings share similar experiences, but then again we process it differently, diba? So that's the main point of us. That's the main point of what we're gonna talk about. I'm glad to be here.
Thank you, Coach. So, yes, dear listeners, fasten your seatbelts for an episode that promises insight, empathy, and a beacon of hope. Let's embark on this journey together as we explore the connection of trauma and grief with the knowledge and wisdom from Coach Boy.
So, we've prepared some questions for you, Coach Boy, to answer. And I'm excited to hear your perspective as a coach as we explore these two concepts, trauma and grief. Starting off with the understanding the basics. Ready, Coach?
Ready?
So, first question that we have for you is, can you provide a brief definitions of trauma and grief in the context of your work? And how do these experiences manifest in individuals?
Well, thank you for that question. It's always important for us to somewhat define trauma and grief in a context where the other one is purely in a human experience and the other one scientifically defined. So grief itself is defined as a natural emotional response to someone's loss. So it may be like a loss of a loved one, a loss of a pet, loss of a job, a loss of a relationship. Grief can occur after a serious illness or in just anticipating loss. Diba? It starts from that. It involves intense sadness, sometimes feeling of shock, numbness, denial, and anger. So these are the most common responses that individuals manifest when we talk about grief. Now, if we are talking about trauma, trauma is any overwhelming response body's nervous system, right? So it triggers a lot of reactions and a lot of abreactions, if I may say, as well. It could cause us to be overly aggressive, hyper vigilant, and avoidant at the same time. So in today, what I really prepared for you guys is how they intersect together is because there is such thing as traumatic grief, right? And this usually happens when an unexpected event or loss. Sometimes it could be like violent or horrific. It intersects. It's a combination of both, and it happens when we experience the distress from separation and traumatic distress at the same time. So later on, we're gonna unpack everything.
Thank you, Coach Boy. I actually just hearing that initial, I resonate to a lot of that. But yes, anyways, moving forward, the intersection of trauma and grief. In your experience, how do trauma and grief intersect or influence each other? And can you share examples of how individuals may experience both simultaneously?
When we talk about separation distress, sometimes we experience intrusive and distressing preoccupation with the disease, with the loss that we experience. We also have that yearning inside of us, longing for someone to come back. We do have a perceptual set, including visual, tactile, auditory illusions. Diba? Usually, when we wake up or before we go to sleep, sometimes we think that we see them. It's just that longing for that space to be filled. That separation distress. It includes crying. Crying is a normal process to release those distress or the stress in our body, right? But involuntary crying naman is different, right? So later on, we're gonna on that step by step. We're also finding answers. We're also trying to find or make meaning of the loss that we had. Diba? Why did this happen? Why did this happen to me? What did I do wrong? Why do I have to go through this? So we're trying to find meaning because we're trying to avoid guilt, shame, fear, diba? That something might happen again, and we're kind of resisting that pain. So if you resist that pain, we could never move on, right? And if we keep on resisting, sige, try to resist kayong dalawa. Try to resist something, kahit ganyan lang. Try to resist. What happens to your body?
Tense.
It's tense, right? So usually when we remember a loved one who passed away, be acquainted dun sa body natin, what happens?
We clench and we suppress it in, and it hurts.
And then we choke.
Yes.
Right? So that's grief coming out, and then we hold it back. And extreme loneliness, of course. There are some studies that traumatic grief are associated with physical health problems like high blood pressure, cancer, cardiac events, ulcerative colitis, suicidality, and global dysfunction. Does it sound familiar? 'Di ba? Yung mga signs and symptoms na yon. Signs and symptoms yun ng alin, right? Those are signs and symptoms of complex PTSD as well, 'di ba? And I mean, they can result to that. So when we talk about traumatic distress naman, these are like the feelings of unfulfilled without the disease. What can I do? How am I going to move forward with my life? The avoidance of painful reminders of loss, feeling that the future is unbearable without our loved ones. How can I walk through this? How can I go home? How can I sleep on my bed? Feeling or believing that a part of ourself has died, and these creates a threat response even in the context of safety or yung wala naman talagang danger. Sometimes we feel numb. We do detach. We detach or avoid knowingly and unknowingly, and sometimes the world just shatter. The world is dangerous. Sometimes I can never drive again, but I can never ride a car again. Or you're just hyper vigilant about your health because it's unsafe. I could die anytime. Also, is sometimes we feel stuck, stunned, and cannot move on, cannot move forward. We don't know what to do. So it's safer to stay where we are. And then there's just this belief about what happened, what's going on. Once we're able to catalyze healing and start that, we can focus more on love, and that's when we begin to have like post traumatic growth.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I do have a follow up with that. I was just thinking about if we can touch a little bit about the science, about what's happening with our nervous system. You and I, we all have a little bit of a understanding of what it is. But for the people who's watching, just to really understand that every one of us have a nervous system, right? And so this is why experiencing trauma and grief, if both is happening all at the same time with an individual, can you touch on a little bit about what's happening within that nervous system? What's that response? That's the natural response that's happening within the body.
That's a very good question. Though now the natural response when it comes to stress, it doesn't matter where it's coming from. If we're triggered by our senses, what we see, what we hear, what we smell, doon na lang tayo sa taste. There was a time, my nanny passed away 2015, and she makes this very good lumpiang toge, right? And I didn't know that I was grieving that much. I thought I was okay. Until 3 months after she passed away, I ate lumpiang toge. And then when I ate lumpiang toge, you can't imagine the tears that went out, the grief that came out. And I swore that I never would eat lumpiang toge again because it was so painful. And when we try to avoid that pain, it creates a threat response kasi we don't want to feel that anymore.
Mhm.
Right? So it's not safe to feel that pain because like you could choke on it and you can die, and our body literally feels that it's dying. And when our body feels that it is in danger, it will activate our threat response system, which in turn will activate fight or flight, right? So we're either gonna be aggressive and fight through it or avoid, right?
Mhm.
Or freeze because it's safer, diba? So heart rate starts to go up, our muscle clench, diba? Once we do not interrupt that threat response and we cannot identify the feeling of safety, we will go to sympathetic dominance. That means that our thinking brain, or our prefrontal cortex, it shuts off. And when it shuts off, there's no language why we don't want to talk. Or if there's language, all we want to talk about is the grief. There's no logic. There's no reasoning, no cognitive functioning, no morality. We have impaired judgment. Once we're grieving, I don't know what to do. And that's a normal physiological response. And then in the attempt of us to balance it pa, we enter compulsive reactions. We begin to throw away our purpose. We begin to just let life eat us, 'di ba? And we begin to somewhat run. So there are suicidalities are there, excessive drinking is there, promiscuity is there, gambling is there, internet is there, just to take away that pain because we don't want to process it because it's uncomfortable. That's how the body is reacting. So again, these responses that I told you, these are normal physiological responses. And that is an evidence that our nervous system is working.
Thank you for answering that. Again, we just wanted to reiterate that, the response that our body creates when we experience grief and trauma is a normal physiological response. So I just wanted to put it out there because we're just human and these are all things that naturally is occurring within our body. So thank you. Let's move on to the next question. Next is about the impact on mental health. So how do trauma and grief affect an individual's mental health, and what are the common psychological responses, and are there unique challenges when addressing both issues simultaneously?
Definitely, definitely, because they're like in our days, we just address what is superficial, and we get depressed and we get anxious, and then we're given antidepressants or anti-anxiety pills, and we're just treating the symptoms and not the cause. So it is important for the helping profession to always know where the client is coming from and meet halfway. Sometimes there are issues when it comes to dealing with traumatic grief, like attempting to avoid distress, right? Attempting to avoid the discomfort. That's why we just like poop, shut it down, right? We don't process it. There are like the to matching triggers to new stressors. Sometimes grief affects an individual's mental health. Again, mental health is brain health. So if we're sleep deprived, if we're hyper vigilant, if we're always on the lookout for something that's what's gonna happen next, this creates immense impact in not only in our mental health but our physical health as well, together with the high risk behaviors that that a person may take just to cope with that grief. Sometimes depression really is one of the most common symptoms. I don't diagnose depression. I'm not allowed to do that. But um, when there is depression, what happens is the person is stuck, and when the person is stuck, we can't move forward. And what is that response? That's freeze, diba? That's a freeze response. So they just want to stay there. So actually, traumatic grief is a combination of separation distress and traumatic distress. But anytime that a clinician or a helping professional is working with someone suffering from symptoms of traumatic grief, meron din siyang symptoms of prolonged complex bereavement, and then post-traumatic stress disorder, and then major depressive disorder. So marami talaga siyang mga component, right? So ano yung components naman ng PTSD? Of course, intrusive thoughts. If you are with the event, like Stephanie has shown in the previous episode, diba? If you're in the event, there's the actual event, so that's criterion A for PTSD, and then we try to avoid stuff, and then we result to unwanted behaviors. So same lang, kaya minsan hindi natin na-identify na talaga that what is happening is actually uh, traumatic grief.
Thank you for that, Coach. Yes, thank you. Um, I was actually just listening, and it actually makes sense if I could just slip in a thought, because I've been in and out of seeing psychiatrists too, and I've had medication, because we were talking just a while ago about mental health and how it can impact the mental health. And in my experience, I'd go and see the psychiatrist, that we given treatment. But for some reason, one thing that always used to confuse me is why sometimes the medications don't work. And it kind of, what you just shared a while ago kind of hit that spot for me. But anyways, moving forward, about the coping mechanisms, Coach. What coping mechanisms do you often recommend for individuals experiencing trauma or grief? And how might these strategies differ when dealing with both simultaneously?
Well, it really depends on the time of the grief, no, and when are they seeking help. So I used to believe that within 1 year, you can grieve all you want with any way you want. It doesn't matter if it's messy, diba? But if sabi nga dun sa book ni Warden about grief counseling and grief therapy, if it's like less than 1 year, what we have to do is to just listen. We just listen. You don't talk. You just listen. You try, because in this way you try to build or maintain a relationship. Kasi again, grief comes from attachment loss, 'di ba? Grief is love with nowhere to go, 'di ba? So we're just gonna try. Some people they cope with drinking. Some people they cope with, isolating themselves. That's totally fine for the first few months to a year. Though no matter how messy it is, 'di ba? Some people are unable to eat. And going sometimes is to eat a bit, drink water, go back to bed, and that's perfectly normal. Without those coping mechanisms, grief could be debilitating. And grief can, if we're not doing this, again, these are competencies of a person because the body is attempting to survive, literally. So when we talk about trauma and grief, yun, sometimes medyo pag palapit na sa 1 year, sometimes we do try to psychoeducate what's happening to you, like what Shay was saying, like the normal process that we do with UDrive and all my coaching clients. First, build a therapeutic relationship. That is very, very important. Second is introduce psychoeducation, tools for hope. If they don't have a house, if they don't have anything to eat or a job, you become like a case manager, because that's what's important for them to survive, right? And then we teach self-regulation. So the importance of self-regulation before exploring their stories, right, is they are able to explore their stories on a relaxed body, which they're unable to do before. Because if you just talk about your grief, it brings you back to that time, and then the thoughts intrude you, and then your body clenches and when your body clenches again, your thinking brain goes offline and you're just re-traumatizing yourself with the grief and the pain and loss. And again, the goal is to focus into something beautiful rather to something painful, right? If it's naman 1 year na, we go into like more active uh, therapy, like exposure, narrative exposure therapy. We do use the salutogenic action focused narrative exposure therapy. So we introduce that gradually, graphic timelines first and everything. In vivo exposure, sometimes we're unable to go to the place that are trauma reminders, unable to talk to people that reminds us of the person that we love, or we're unable to go to the dog park where we used to take our pet who has passed away. So little by little, we're exposing. It's either in vivo, which is in person, or imaginal exposure. 'Di ba? So we do that. So it's gradual, and again, this is individual or client led, and it's not coach led. 'Di ba? Kasi we all grieve differently.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Let's move on to the next question. So, this will be focusing on the triggers and the challenges. So, how do trauma and grief create triggers? And what strategies do you recommend for managing them? And are there unique challenges individuals face when dealing with both at the same time?
It usually comes in a package. It usually comes in a package because again, our triggers come from past painful learning,
Mhm.
'di ba? So we never separate them. So we look at it as a whole. Salutogenic approach tayo. We always look at it as a whole kasi probably the way you respond to the way people respond to grief and loss at the current moment is also how they responded before to something that they lost,
Mhm.
right? Sometimes it creates triggers when there is high emotion and the event. How is trauma formed? There's an event. No, ito pala event. There's an event and then there's high emotion,
Mhm.
'di ba? And it gets encoded. And the strategies of that um with with coping with that is of course you mourn. You mourn for all the parts of you or the layers of you that was lost throughout that process. Ang unang-una talaga is acceptance, 'di ba?
Mhm.
They have like 5 stages of grief. Actually, these are not 5 stages. These are 5 reactions towards grief and death. Diba? We get angry. Diba? We deny the reality of that. We bargain. Pumunta na tayo din sa Lord, or like, God, please, diba, help me through this. I'm gonna do everything. Anger, diba, and acceptance, but you accept first, because when we begin to accept things for what they are, we begin to soften, and when we begin to soften, we lower our distress levels, and then we're able to process that grief, or that pain of grief, and then we learn to adjust
Mhm.
to the world without our loved one, diba? We there may have like external adjustments. You might you might what redecorate your room, diba? Internal adjustments. If you're used to eating ng may kasabay, you might want to try to eat out alone. You might want to watch a movie alone. You might want to walk by yourself, and soften through it, and that's okay. And you need to have like spiritual adjustments as well, and the beliefs, because again, the lack of faith, the lack of belief, um this is a result of us and not being able to regulate our nervous system is a casualty, diba? So you go back to the roots, and you go back to praying to the God, that as you know him, or her, whom your higher power is, diba? And then you find siguro an enduring connection to the one who passed. Sometimes I talk to my Yaya, and sometimes I don't have her number already, but for 2 years I was like just texting her. Diba na, okay, I'm here now. Just or what should I do next? What should I eat next? When you see the shift, that from someone who's physically there to someone who potentially, diba, be a part of a universe that's bigger than what we know. It creates a calming response sa atin. You go back to those spiritual practices. You light a candle for them. Or during their birthdays, you celebrate pa with them, and you're not celebrating, diba? You're not celebrating their loss anymore, but their life. What are the unique challenges when dealing with both, and at the same time? Sometimes the challenge is depicting which is grief driven, and yung mismong response sa grief, right? It's also challenging for to depict where the pain is coming from. Because sometimes it's not only from the loss, but it's also from the anticipation of the future. It's from the anticipation of what's gonna happen to me. So, yeah, so there's a lot of unpacking to do there.
Thank you. Can I just add a little bit of a comment, or I guess just from what you were saying, that when there's high emotion associated with that event, that's pretty much what gets stored within the body or within our mind, right? So, if that's okay,
Sure.
I just in relation to my own trauma and grief and what are my those like trigger symptoms, it felt like it was something that was a both combined symptom of grief and trauma triggers. So I remember when I went back to work 8 months after being off from mat leave, I actually started to see one client first, because I was slowly, I was gradually giving myself some time to just see how I interact with my patient. And it just so happened that this very first client I saw when I got, she shared her story of how fearful and anxious she was because she became septic after having a ruptured bowel. So I came in to see her for a surgery on social wound, and I was her nurse at that time, providing wound consultation. And hearing her tell her story actually triggered me. All of a sudden, I felt this uneasy feel within my body. And at the same time, you know, knowing that I'm there as a nurse, like there to help her, I had to learn to keep myself calm and regulated. And I had to remind myself that I'm safe, and that I'm here to help this lady. But leaving that client's house, actually, I felt very overwhelmed because there was a lot of things that I felt like my chest was actually I felt like I was having palpitations. I was starting to get tense because I remember what it felt like when I was having to experience that when I was experiencing sepsis at that time. So, there's a lot of things there that I had to process. This was before meeting you, Coach Boy. This is when I was like, oh my gosh, what is this thing that I'm experiencing at work? Because there's a lot of medical things that are, I can relate to, being on the patient side. And then the experience ko yun, not just being the professional side. I was also a patient when I was in the hospital with our losses. It was just really interesting just to see that perspective of that client. But at the same time, being her nurse, I was also triggered. So yeah, it was just really interesting how that high emotion that I had associated with my own loss was something that was really triggering for me. But I was able to break that down and process all those little details that happened. So yeah, thank you.
It could really be triggering, no? So that's why our what we want to say to those in the helping profession, 'di ba? It's our job to first self-regulate. Say your patient cannot be more regulated than you are,
Mm.
because it could become uncomfortable for us, and that is us dealing with our own traumas and our own past painful learning. Kaya self-regulation first.
That's right. Anyways, yeah, so now we point out on cultural sensitivity. How do you approach trauma and grief, coach, within the context of the diverse cultural backgrounds?
That's a very good question because I do have like a diverse array of clients with different beliefs and cultural backgrounds, diba? So what I usually do is I ask them, how do you grieve in your religion, or how do you mourn in your culture? And then you just let them, whatever works for them, because again, this is client driven, and it's not for me to dictate. But what I know is, what we do when it comes to coaching is, we all have the same nervous system. We all have the same nervous system, and that's why it is very important, because no matter what background you are, our brain would work the same, and
Mhm.
it will work its way to protect us, to keep us safe, and then it would work as to avoid pain, diba? It would set us in autopilot if it wants to contribute to conserve energy, and it will find purpose, right? So, let them go through the pain as they know it. If they have rituals, let them do that, because those are healing, diba? Sometimes the indigenous, they play drums, and they play music, they play hymns, and then they burn things, but you let them grieve how they want to grieve, and then you psychoeducate them like any other
Mm.
person.
Thank you. What I got from that was, when people mourn from whatever cultural background they're coming from, it's really that mourning, the expression, the act of the act of expression as to how they would cope, right? So I like that idea, client driven, client focused. So look we let them lead us, and us giving them that space
Mm.
to express what that is. Sometimes verbalizing oh, you know what, I've written them a letter or something, or I have decided to memorialize them by planting a tree or something like that. So it's nice when they're able to verbalize that, or in a way kind of put it down in a paper, or however things they can put it out there to express, because it's really really important that um as we grieve, that we let it out, in one way in one way or another. It's very healing. That I would definitely say it's really true and helpful. So let's move on to the long-term effects. So can you discuss the potential long-term effects of unresolved trauma and grief? And are there strategies to mitigate these long-term effects?
So, traumatic grief and trauma and grief, right? It's instinctually avoided by suppression, repression, and dissociation, right? Because we are trying to avoid the pain by all means and our body's attempting to go back to that balance. With prolonged exposure to fight, flight, and freeze, right? Our body would begin to adapt to these responses kasi ito yung makakapag feel safe sa atin. So what happens, sometimes due to chronic trauma or stress, our body goes to, our body has like immune system dysfunction issues. There are high risk for heart issues, autoimmune diseases, 'di ba? Um, respiratory diseases such as asthma, prolonged infrequent drug use or substance use, nandyan yan. Suicidality, nandyan ang depression, a lot of mental health disorders root from trauma as well, 'di ba? And yun, the strategies to mitigate these long-term effects. First is to teach the client to somewhat self-regulate and be intentional, diba? Perceptual maturation is there, self-care is there, and then connection and support, which is at the top when it comes to grieving, diba? So, what is the solution to this? We wanna teach them how to relax their body in the context of remembering the losses and desensitize and lessen the pain so there's more love and narrative. We allow them to talk on a relaxed body, telling the story on a relaxed body. If they want to reread a eulogy for them on a relaxed body, so we could we relegate that loss to the past, and then we just remember them with love and not the pain.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Coach Boy. Actually, I am so happy because I am more or less through your teachings that you have shared with me and everybody else. I'm actually at that stage now, and I'm really happy that I'm in the journey of my healing. But yeah, um, when is it advisable for individuals to seek professional help for trauma or grief? And how do trauma coaches and therapists contribute to the healing process?
That's a very nuanced question because for me, it is advisable to seek healing whenever the person's ready. So first, yun nga, di ba? Less than 1 year, all the person can do or all the helper can do is to somewhat just listen. And that would mean a lot
Mhm.
because you tend to fill a void. Di ba? You just listen. And this is very important for me to say because some people, when people are grieving, don't listen to understand and they just listen to respond.
Mm.
Kasi gusto na nila mapatay yun agad eh. Kasi it's an uncomfortable feeling. Yeah, okay, kaya mo yan. No, everything will be okay. And if a person is grieving and then a person is at loss, if the person has traumatic grief or trauma or grief or whatever the person is going through, wala siyang idea kung ano yung okay. We don't have an idea of that. We don't even know how the world would look like without the person.
Exactly. Yeah.
So, yun, just listen sa mga unang stages and then teach self-regulation skills if you want. Or exhibit, show how you self-regulate. Sometimes there's a threat response din sa atin na kailangan
Mm.
solusyonan yung problema niya, and no. Because the problem is no one can fill that void yet. And you don't have to do that. We don't have to be heroes all the time.
Yeah.
So, whenever the person's ready, yun nga sinabi ko na kanina, if it's like more than a year after teaching them to self-regulate, then we do integration, probably walking them through with what we did, Steph, with the train on a relaxed body,
Yes.
probably. Then you begin to tell your story on a relaxed body, and it could feel the difference, diba? You
Yes.
experienced that. You told your story when you
Yes.
didn't know about traumatic grief yet, and then what happened? You might want to share.
Well, basically, I don't know. I'm just happy that I've come to a point in my life where I met you, and it's changed a lot in the way I see things and understand things. And I think no matter what pain it was, the pain will always be there, but I've learned to brave through it. And it can be a very new it can be a new way of feeling pain. It doesn't have to go, it doesn't mean it's going away. Pain will always be there.
And that is from post-traumatic growth. So after you're able to tell your story and you have a supportive relationship, and you're on a relaxed body and you tell your story and you integrate that story in a relaxed body, that now you're beginning to somewhat see new opportunities, build new relationships, diba? You somewhat find comfort in remembering them.
Yeah.
'Di ba? Kasi before, 'di ba, when we remember our loved ones who passed, we just tense up,
Yeah.
and we just stress up, and sabi nga ni Dr. Gentry, like in his call, when he does that, what are you afraid of? When you remember your loved ones who passed, where's the danger in remembering them? So you don't have to clench. But if you remember them, how they lived, how they loved, 'di ba?
Yeah.
How well they lived and how well they loved, and that creates a difference, and it creates like a greater appreciation for life, and then spiritual maturity is there as well. So by the way, these the things that I'm saying right now, I got this from Dr. Eric Gentry's talk of traumatic grief. So he did one from, I don't know, 2017 maybe, or no, 2022 for Pessy.
Nice. Hopefully he can do it again for us in the Philippines.
Probably. Let's see.
All right. I think that was our last question for this episode, but I just haven't last remarks or any comments. I must say, that our conversation today is very insightful. This is why I see the importance of you having Coach Poy, you join us to be our guest, because we talk about grief, and you being a trauma coach, there's so much connection between the two, and between Ate Stephanie and I. Our experiences are something that's very we've gone through some significant life-changing events that really brought us here together. Being the trauma informed individual that I am now, and continuing to explore this journey of learning and healing, with all of you, is definitely helping me make sense of the experience that I had, and the behaviors after our losses. So personally, Coach Boy, you've been a beacon of hope for me in my own healing journey of grief. So maraming salamat for everything that you do. Ate Steph, is there anything else you want to add or say before we end today's episode?
Well, I can say it over and over again. I can never thank Coach Boy for everything that he's done for me as well. And yeah, and of course, the privilege to be our guest here is beautiful. So thank you for that, Coach Boy. Thank you for your time. Thank you for
You're welcome.
all of us.
I'm always available for both of you, whenever and wherever. Just wanna like reiterate that sometimes we're afraid to feel emotions because emotions makes us uncomfortable.
Mm,
But these emotions can lead us to something, diba, that we're looking for, and it's not to avoid. It's something that could help us go through. whatever it is that we're going through. It doesn't matter if it's trauma, grief, or traumatic grief. Um, us being afraid, especially the Filipino people, us being so afraid of big emotions is the one that kept us stuck because there's a threat response. And again, there's no danger in feeling those emotions. There's no danger. You're causing more harm to yourself than good if you keep on repressing those emotions. Emotions are meant to be felt and processed and just embrace everything. Kaya nga sabi dito, embrace the echo.
Thank you so much. I like that you said emotions are meant to be felt and processed. I'll remember that. As we close today's episode, we just want to extend our deepest gratitude to all of our listeners and viewers who's watching us tonight or today, wherever you are, who've embarked on this profound exploration with us. It's been a conversation filled with insights, empathy, and a shared understanding of the intricate dance between these two powerful forces, the trauma and grief, or traumatic grief, if you want to combine that. We hope that our exploration has resonated with you, whether you're on a personal healing journey or supporting someone else through theirs.
As we close the chapter, let's carry the wisdom we've gained into our lives, whether you're navigating your own healing journey or supporting others. May you find strength, resilience, and the courage to embrace the echoes of both trauma and grief.
Thank you again for being part of today's episode. And again, thank you again, Coach Boy, for joining us and sharing all your wisdom and knowledge. We really appreciate you. And remember, the journey is ongoing and healing is a process. So let's be kind to ourselves and others. My name is Shay, and with my co host at the Steph, and joining by Coach Boy, we are signing off from Embrace the Echo Grief Talks. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.